Believe not that in the land of Gondor the blood of Nmenor is spent, nor all its pride and dignity forgotten. By our valour the wild folk of the east are still restrained, and the terror of Morgul kept at bay, and thus alone are peace and freedom maintained in the lands behind us, bulwark of the west. But if the passages of the river should be won, what then? My Gavan and Melonin, and well met indeed. I'm Arachir Galadrith, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome back as we give you another version 4/version 4.5 faction overview. Do note that as the time of recording this video, which is the 11th of April, version 4.5 has not yet been released, but also do note that 4.5 is purely a bug fixing update. There's no new material, which is why these videos are fine to continue on. So we are dealing with Gondor then. So the starting size, Gondor has the wonderful accolade of being the largest faction at the start of the game. I'm not going to count the number of regions because that's really boring, but there are quite a few. You've got most of them are scattered in the east though. As you can see out in the west here, there's only very few regions covering quite a lot of ground. But most of Gondor's regions are clustered in the east. And you have a large starting domain. Your army is also quite sizable, given that you just have so many towns that you can pull troops together from. You'll note that we've tried to counter this as best we can by essentially dropping the garrison in most places right down to almost nothing. So you generally just get the Lord with one militia unit. There are the odd towns, such as Pelargir, Ministereth and Osgiliath and Caradandros, etc., where you do get the odd additional unit or slightly better unit, but each individual town has a relatively small garrison, but if you pull all those units together, of course, you have a relatively large army. You also have more generals than any other faction. So if you are one for making the game incredibly easy by general spamming, then Gondor is something that you can do this with. We advise not general spamming. We've done what we can to try and weaken generals across the board because they are hellishly overpowered in Medieval 2. And of course, in all future games, Third Age, Creative Assembly also did what they could to weaken bodyguards and generals' bodyguards to the point that in fact you only ever get one per army, and they're generally considered pretty useless until they get skilled up, until you get things like Warhammer, Total War of course, where lords become one-man armies. But in Med 2, the units are really powerful, so we tried to scale them down. If we start with the family tree and then look at the custom settlements, because there's a lot of them, the family tree, of course, is relatively contained despite the large number of generals. And of course, Denethor is your faction leader, and Finduilas died some time ago, and there's Boromir and Faramir. Note that there is a time discrepancy where in 2980, Faramir should either not be alive or be only a few years old. And I think even Boromir shouldn't be alive or should only be a few years old. But of course, they're so iconic, we've put them in. Húrin is married to Denethor's unnamed sister, we've called her as Galdis, and Angbor the Fearless, his name is married off to the other sister called Barahel. He did actually have a third sister, and I can't remember why she's not in the family tree. But in any event, Húrin and Angbor are part of the tree as well, and there's one son that will come of age in 15 years, which is 60 turns. Nmenor will come of age. So you've got quite a nice family tree to get you going with. So if we look then at custom bodyguards, of course your family tree are all custom in their own way. So Captain General Boromir, who is your faction heir, begins the game with Wardens of the White Tower. And there they are. Denethor comes with the standard bodyguard. He does not have a custom, so he just gets the generic general's bodyguard. Faramir comes with Ithilien Rangers, as you might expect. There's Faramir and his Ithilien Rangers, starting in Henethanoon, which is a fort now, which we'll discuss in a moment. Forlong from Lasarnak comes with, as you might expect, Axemen of Lasarnak, or Lasarnak Axemen. Down in Pelargir, there's Orodreth of Pelargir, and he comes with Lebenin Marines. Because he is part of the Lebenin region. There's a few more, so bear with us. Yorthon over in Tarnost is the only mounted general you get. He comes with Royal Swan Guard. So he's essentially a lone commander from Dol Amroth, which is very cool. You do also get Angbor the Fearless over here, who comes with Laminin Clansmen. Each of these generals obviously has some advantage and some disadvantage. Up in the fort at Ethring, or it's not Ethring, is it? It's the Stone of Erech. Dwyn here comes with, as you might imagine, Blackroot Vale archers, and he also has a couple of archers with him in that fort that you can use. Over in Seralond, perhaps the faction's finest general, given that the cavalry is so numerous, is Llewyn of Pynneth Gellan, who comes with Pynneth Gellan Cavalry. He really is the contender, and I would actually probably go out on a limb and say your best general. You absolutely want to get him into the fight as soon as possible because of those auto-replenishing cavalry, which are so useful. And then finally, Dinenian, all the way on the very western edge of your regions, Anfalas Pikemen, so a nice pike general over there. So you've got more custom generals, or it is custom, isn't it? Yeah, custom generals than any other nation as well. You've got a lot of Guinness World Records at the start of the game. So, of course, the area that you start in is heavily defined by the course of the River Anduin and then the White Mountains, which stretch out on the western northern side. So your only points of attack come across the Aether Anduin, the mouths of the Anduin, into Fanbalont or into Linhir for Dol Amroth. You can't cross the Anduin anywhere else other than at the bridge of Osgiliath, so you've got to watch out for that, and of course the bridges at Caer Andros. Other than that, the next crossing is the Falls of Rauros, which are quite a long way to the north. In your western edge, there's the gap there, which I think we've called nothing. Nanny Forgay, whatever that means, is the name. There's two little forts there denoting the gap, which you can garrison and defend against Ennard Wyth. They can also, of course, come through Tharagrondost and Andrast, but there are two river crossings that are key in defence there. This gentleman's standing in front of one with a fort just next to him, and Tharagrondost itself is on the western side of a river crossing into Gondor proper. So you can hold the enemy at the two forts there quite easily, and indeed at the rivers in Tharagrondost, the northern or the eastern one. So your western border is very secure if you want it to be, or it can be where you primarily go. The rebel regions, you'll note they're only available to you really in the far west. Tharagrondost is rebel at start, Cirith Eor, Balorn, you might be able to beat Ennard Wyth too. Oh, hang on a moment everyone, bear with me just 1 second. And we're back. So I'd forgotten to set it to turn 2 to see the auto expansion. So in the west the picture is slightly different. Ennard Wyth start with Balorn. So your only options are Cirith Eor and Tharagrondost. You can try and go across the strait and get Barad Han before the Ardenaim or indeed Dol Amroth do. You've got Tirith Rhaid, Amun Aithel, and then Gobel Mirlond. But no, Gobel Mirlond is very well defended, and it takes the Ardenaim quite some time to get across the mouths of the Harnan down there. So you could possibly try and beat them to that. It's unlikely that you will, though. You'll see that Mordor is already besieging East Osgiliath at the start, but they don't start with it. So they do have to get across the river, but they do get Gelabrin, which again, obviously, I hadn't shown you because I was in the wrong turn number. Custom battle maps for Gondor, they have more than anyone else. Of course, Minas Tirith, both Osgiliaths, ruined and upgraded Caer Andros, the fort of Henneth Anun, which is, as I say, just a fort now. It is no longer a town. It is part of the Forests of Ithilien region, and the city of that is East Osgiliath. So this is all East Osgiliath now. Henneth Anun is still a fantastic battle map to defend in, and you get obviously the free upkeep of 4 units in a fort, which is handy, and it does have the Henneth Anun battle map. That's why I mention it. Other than that, though, the nearest custom settlement really is, I think, the city of Umbar, although no, I don't even think that's custom yet because we're going to try and get that from another mod when it releases. You've got Minas Morgul, Cirith Ungol, Durthang, Morannon and Barad-dûr all the way over there as well. So the custom settlements are all grouped around the centre. Now do note, Western and Eastern Osgiliath, it's worth mentioning, they push the engine to its absolute maximum limit. So if your computer doesn't play the game too well or struggles to play the game, then you will almost certainly have a lot of crashes in those two cities because they are unfortunately just so heavy on the system. It really struggles to generate Osgiliath, and the problem is only exacerbated when you rebuild them. There's very little that we can do about that, really. They were created by the Third Age team, of course. We could take away certain buildings and assets from the maps, which would help, but then it would lose some of its special quality, you know? So the problem is because it's essentially generating 2 cities every time you fight on it, and that's why it's stressed out. Because you may be thinking, hang on, the Osgiliaths aren't anywhere near as big as Minas Tirith, but in terms of actual assets, Minas Tirith is much smaller than what you have to fight in here. So just watch out, there may be a lot of crashes around those two. Do also note, in terms of geography, Caer Andros on the eastern side, this is a river, so you can stand on that bridge and you will get a bridge battle. It will be a normal bridge battle. The eastern side is what's called a land bridge, which is a feature the game has that lets you cross oceans without having a visible bridge. Now, the Elite Dwarf has very, very cleverly and masterfully put in a visual of a bridge so that you can tell that there is one. But if you fight on this tile, it will not be a bridge battle. You will be squeezed up against the shoreline on a coast battle, and it will be not as easy to defend as you think. Caer itself, RK has played around with the settlement a great many times, and it should now work almost flawlessly, particularly in version 4.5. So hopefully all the problems of Caer have finally been dealt with. Just watch out defending on that western side. So neighbours then. You start, of course, allied to Dol Amroth and Rohan. Dol Amroth, it does not need me to say, is sandwiched to your southern side, and Rohan is away on the northern side of the White Mountains. You start at war with the Ardenheim, with Harad, with Khand, and with Mordor. So everyone to the south of you is your enemy. But no, you're not at war with Dol Guldur, you're not at war with Rhûn, or, crucially, Enedwaith or Isengard. So the west is still very much up for grabs. And that is certainly a way that you can make the Gondor campaign easier, which is allying Enedwaith. If you get them on side, your western side is completely locked down, and then it's just you versus Mordor. And you should be able to overcome Mordor if you push into them. So economy and the... and buildings and whatnot. Your diplomat, of course, comes from Ministereth, if you are interested. I think he comes from the Tower of Icthelion. Yes, he does indeed. There we are, along with Fountain Guard. So your diplomat comes out of Ministereth. Ministereth is all of these regions being custom settlements, and indeed the 5 custom settlements in Mordor are all, of course, as large as they are going to be at the start of the game. So they're excellent towns to take. So it's very easy to make money as Gondor because you have such well-developed towns. Putting aside the grouping of these 4 very highly developed towns, places like Karasast is already a large town, Pelargir starts as a city, and that helps you a great deal. It's essentially the further west you go, the less developed your nation becomes, bar Lond Gallen, which is sort of the last point of civilization, if you will. Serolond is only a village, Anulond is only a town, but Tharagrundost is a castle, so it's quite an interesting one to take. In terms of buildings, you're not restricted in any way. You get everything of everything, so you get all the way up to Stronghold. In fact, you're one of the few that gets Fortress and Citadel, but only, of course, in Osgiliath. So you have the ability to upgrade West Osgiliath, which starts as a fortress. You can upgrade it to a citadel, but that's the only place you can do that. Eastern Osgiliath starts as a large city. You upgrade it to a huge city, and again, that's the only place that you can do that. But otherwise, you get all of the tiers. So you get town, large town, city, large city, and you get keep, castle, stronghold. So you can upgrade all 3. In terms of guilds, I don't think you're a particularly guild-heavy nation. You get the Merchants Guild, and just to clear this up once again, the first tier of the Merchants Guild doesn't do anything other than give you an increase in tradable goods. The second tier gives you a merchant. So you can get a merchant out of the second tier, but you can only ever get one of the second tier in your entire empire. Note that Gondor don't get the third tier. You are not master merchants, but you're dabbling. In the Warriors Guild, you get Armsman's Guild, Royal Armsman's Guild, and Order of Boromir I. Armsman Guild gives you a melee weapon bonus. The Royal Armsman Guild gives you a morale bonus to troops worldwide. And then lastly, if you are able to get the Order of Boromir, which you almost certainly won't, you can train Wardens of the White Tower out of it, and the morale bonus is improved. If you're wondering why we're calling it Order of Boromir I, given that Boromir, who is currently alive, is never steward, it's just to make sure that people don't think that this is named after the Boromir who is currently in Western Osgiliath, and in fact it's named after his namesake, who is said to be one of the only humans in existence that the Witch King was afraid of. Hence why the guild is named after him. And I stress again, the Witch King was not afraid of this Boromir, it's a Boromir who lived some time ago. And who was steward of Gondor. So you get the Warriors Guild, and if you can get all the way to the top, you get Wardens of the White Tower wherever you can build that building. So it's an extra place to build them, which is good. You'll note you do get quite a few choices for your buildings, and there's just an awful lot going on. Now, the Fiefdom Barracks and Ruthian Barracks we can talk about as it blends into sort of gameplay events, really. These allow you to train troops from the fiefdoms, which we shall touch upon more, of course, in the battle side of the video. The Fiefdom Barracks allows you to train fiefdom units, but you can only get that in certain locations, one of them being Ministereth, if we jump back to Ministereth to do this setup. Fiefdom Barracks, there we are. So that's a unique barracks that allows you to train and therefore retrain all of your fiefdom units in Minas Tirith. The Military Academy, which is now known as a Fiefdom Way Station, gives you a public order bonus and allows you to retrain Fiefdom units wherever you build it. So the Fiefdom units, if we just discuss on that briefly, Gondor is broken down into fiefdoms, much like any feudal state from the Middle Ages was. So each of these regions is sort of semi-autonomous, and they probably pay tithes and taxes to Gondor's major city and to the steward or the king if there was one, but generally speaking they rule their lands as they will, and these are places like Lossarnach, Lebenin, and Anfalas, of course, Pinth Gellan. All of these regions are the different fiefs, and they all have a very unique unit that comes from those specific regions. So you've got Anfalas Pikemen, we've already seen the Pinth Gellan Cavalry, which Helluin has, you've got the Blackroot Vale Archers, etc. You all know this, Gondor's a very popular faction. But they can only be trained in their fiefdom regions unless you build that Fiefdom Barracks that I'm discussing now. So the Fiefdom Barracks lets you train extra units in Ministereth, and if you're out campaigning, you can build the Fiefdom Way Station in the Military Academy, and it will allow you to retrain those fiefdom units. You can't train them, so they'll only ever train in your heartland, but they can retrain anywhere you like. So that's the Fiefdom Barracks. Note the Amrothian Barracks is built in Tarnost and allows you to get Amrothian Squires before the Barracks Event, and then after the Barracks Event it gives you, I think, Knights of the Silver Swan, but I can't quite remember. Unfortunately, apologies for that. It never shows you script locked off units, which won't be a problem in version 5 when the Barracks Event is gone. So the version 5 versions of these faction overviews will finally show you all the units you can train. But anyway, Amrothian Barracks is only available in Tarnost, and it gives you Squires, which are a much better cavalry unit than really anything you're going to get. Arguably Gondor Cavalry maybe is a bit better, but in the early game they're fantastic. So do try in Tarnost to get that Amrothian Barracks up and out early, because then you get the Squires, which is very handy. If we jump back to Ministereth, or indeed to the castle, you'll note you also get the advanced blacksmith called a Numenorian Foundry, and that can be built in the capital and major cities of other nations. I think possibly Mordor maybe, but definitely places like Khazad-dûm, I think Dol Guldur. Really, as Gondor, you're unlikely to get it because it's most places to your north. I think the nearest place that I'm certain you get it is Isengard. I'm possibly Barad-dûr. I think maybe Barad-dûr, but I can't quite, don't quote me on that one. But anyway, that of course just gives you an improvement to your unit's armor stat, improving their armor stat. In terms of ships, you are a naval nation, and in fact you are one of the better naval nations. You are the third best naval nation, after the Elves, and then the Ardenaim, and then Gondor. And you can already see from what we've built here that we get 2 units, the Air Sul, or Ocean Wind, and then the Alcorondas as the last tier, which always sounds so Spanish to me. Because it really does look like a Spanish word, doesn't it? Particularly if you give it the flair. Alcarondas. Castle of the Sea in Ardenaic, apparently. But anyway, you get good ships, but you're not as good as the Ardenaim, so you've always got to outnumber them, and you're nowhere near as good as the Elves, so you'll need to really outnumber them if you decide to attack them. Enedwaith are also a shipbuilding nation, but you're much better than them. Harad are a shipbuilding nation, but again, you're better than them. So don't worry too much about Harad or Enedwaith's ships, but do keep an eye out for the black ships of the Ardenaim, which unfortunately we can't show you the name of. Balukazgar or something like that, I can't quite remember. But anyway, you're a naval nation, so you do get ships. But note that you don't get any ships anywhere north of Minas Tirith, so you can't build ships on the Anduin because the AI just builds them, they sit there and do nothing. So anywhere north of the Bridge of Osgiliath, you can't build ships. So Caer Andros, for example, can build a port, but cannot build ships out of it. That is not a bug, it is intended. Minas Tirith is the most northerly point on the Anduin you can train any ships, and that's of course because you can get out into the ocean. So then we come to Gondor's gameplay events proper. Now the biggest change for version 4 is a small, and some might say interesting, some might say bizarre, depends on your take really, a small little script for Denethor to reflect his madness. So he now has a Palantir, and the Anor Palantir, which means sun, as in the sun, the ball in the sky that gives us all light and energy. So he has that. And the script is a long process of him sort of descending into madness, and his madness affects your nation overall. So in the worst condition Denethor is in, then your generals will start to get negative traits as well. Now, they're only very minor negative traits, but the generals will get them. Denethor's condition is worsened by the passage of time, but that's only very minor. But chief events are like the death of his sons or the loss of places like Osgiliath to Mordor. So, for example, it's very difficult to stop Mordor getting East Osgiliath, and that will likely be the first catalyst in Denethor's downfall. Denethor will bring down your nation slowly, but it is a very minor effect, as I stress again. And his madness is only alleviated and cleared by the destruction of Mordor, whether that be through the rings or through conquest. It doesn't matter. Once Mordor is destroyed, the script completely ends. All negative effects and any positive effects are lifted and removed, and your faction plays as normal. Now, at the start of the campaign, the Anor Palantir gives Denethor bonuses. He gets +4 to his line of sight, public security, and 1 to his acumen, which is how good someone is at ruling in a city. And so at the moment he's an average city governor, to be honest. But at the start of the script, as he descends into the madness, at first it gives positive gains, and then it starts giving negative gains, or negative debuffs. Is that a double negative? I don't know. Anyway, so as I say, major events will shock it, like Denethor losing battles, or just you losing battles in general. Key events are the loss of major cities, like Osgiliath, Caerandros, Ministereth, and massive events are the loss of his sons, so try and keep Faramir and Boromir alive. It should also be noted, in the interest of giving you all the information, that if Denethor is killed, whether willingly or unwillingly, the script also completely ends and there are no negative effects. So if you don't really want to be bothered with it and you're not all that interested in Denethor and role-playing a little bit doesn't really interest you, you can kind of send him off to his death and then the script won't do anything at all. It will end there and there. Then and there. Do note that when the script completes, if you defeat Mordor, you do get a bonus for that. You do get rewarded as a faction with some monetary gain, I believe. So it unfortunately only really has negative effects apart from right at the beginning, but it is just the effects are very minor and you can play on and you'll barely notice them. It's just a little bit of flavour really to show you that Denethor did look into the Palantir. He was battling Sauron quite successfully for some time, which is why they're positive to begin with, but then of course Sauron did start to get the better of him, and he does sort of, losing his mind isn't perhaps the right word, but Denethor does succumb to Sauron's will, or not Sauron's will, but Denethor loses to Sauron in the Battle of Wits is possibly the best way to describe it. And so either destroying Sauron, i.e. Mordor, or losing Denethor removes the script. But it does affect all your generals. So there's that one. The other thing to note is a bit of a side note, is that the Nazgul will all be available to Mordor when you play as Gondor. I mention this because if you play as anyone else, the Nazgul are staggered and they only come for Mordor every 10 turns. Whether you play as Mordor or you play as someone other than Gondor, the Nazgul are staggered. But for you as Gondor, you will face all the Nazgul. So they are currently all standing there ready to go, but they will be unlocked straight away. So after this turn they'll all move off and start doing what they want to do. So you'll have the Nazgul coming for you. The other thing to note is that we've implemented a sort of anti-rush script against Mordor, because it should not be easy to destroy Mordor within the first 15 turns. And so, to simulate the fact that Mordor is really completely geared up and ready for war, if you attack Mordor very early, then you will get attacked yourself. So you'll note there are 2 large armies at the moment. That's just Mordor's starting armies. But if you take Minas Morgul within a certain amount of turns, I think it might be 20 or 25, Mordor will get an influx of troops. Again, if you take Cirith Ungol or the Black Gate, the same thing happens. So it's very difficult to rush into Mordor. Some of you may say this is a really gamey aspect, but as Gondor, history has proven to us that if you group all of your generals into one army, you can defeat Mordor within about 15 turns. At that point, the campaign is completely won and is a waste of everyone's time. So if you really want to feel like an absolute pro and destroy Mordor in 20 turns and then never play Gondor again, then be our guest. But it's now much harder to do that. To simulate the fact that Gondor were really up against it, and it was completely implausible for Gondor to actually mount an attack on Mordor. And so we're trying to simulate that if they actually deign to do that, or dare to do that, sorry, deign's not the right word in that instance. If they dare to do that, you're going to be up against a real fight. Now, the final thing before we jump over to, or discuss the difficulty and move to the battle map, is canned. Do note, of course, that when the AI is playing as canned, there is a 50-50 chance that they will side with the blue wizards or not. If they do side with the blue wizards, then at a certain point around turn 50-ish, I think it is, they'll suddenly join you. They'll suddenly ally with you. And it's at that point that you can really start turning the tables, because then you'll have canned attacking Mordor from the east, and you can start really applying pressure from the west and sandwich Mordor between your two armies. But do note that canned goes up against everyone around it when it sides with the blue wizards. So Rune and Harad will also then start attacking canned, because they will be fair game. So you've got to watch out for that. Right, I think that's everything for Gondor then. So then we can move on to how difficult they are. Now, these difficulty ratings are a bit of a joke, to be honest, because I appreciate that my Dol Amroth rating and my Anduin rating were both way too low. So my Gondor rating is going to seem silly, because I think Gondor is easier than Dol Amroth, but I'm probably going to rate it higher, because in terms of the campaigns overall, Gondor is quite a tricky one, depending on how easily you rush Mordor. It depends very much on your actions. So if you play Gondor without going out of your way to try and make it easier, which is a bit of a bizarre statement, but if you play Gondor by attacking Mordor, attacking Cand, attacking Harad, attacking the Ardenaim, and seeing what happens with Ened Wyth, then I would say that Gondor is a difficulty of 3.5 is what I want to say, but we're going to go with 4. We're going to go with 4. I'm sorry. I can hear people hitting their heads against the screen, but I'm going to go with 4. However, as I say, if you work diligently to obtain an alliance with Ened Wyth and perhaps use some diplomacy to keep either Cand or Harad or indeed the Ardenaim off your back, so that you only have to focus on Mordor, then even with the stuff we've given Mordor, it's still a very simple campaign. The difficulty comes from being swamped by all these factions at once, and it depends very much on how you can defend at the Anduin, either the mouths or the crossings of Osgiliath and Caer Andros, or indeed if you get an alliance with Ened Wyth. But I'm going to say that generally speaking, for most players, the campaign difficulty will be a 4. And talk amongst yourselves why, or I've gotten that wrong or not. I do find the difficulty things very funny, I have to say, because I haven't played every faction, and I do come at this with a really, that doesn't matter, you'll still win. I think most factions are easy, so my difficulty ratings are a bit skewed. But then even though I'm not a fantastic player, I've been playing for so long, and I know so many little bits of information about how the game works, that it is inherently easier for me. Even if I don't make the best decisions, I still know that overall I'm going to win. And so my difficulty ratings are probably a bit skewed. But anyway, it's a 4. Now let us jump over to the battle map, which is going to be bloody long because Gondor has such a massive roster. I'm ready. I should get a drink in the interim. And we'll jump over to the battle map. Welcome then to Gondor's battle map. Now their roster doesn't have anywhere near as many tiers as most others, and they have a quite clearly defined 3-tier structure with militia at the front. So they don't really have trash. They start with militia, then they get mainstream, and then they get elites. Now arguably 1 or 2 of the elites could be considered uber, but it's really pushing it and not all that much. You'll note that cavalry is not something they excel in. They've got a lot of infantry choices. Note that there's only a single javelin unit in the whole army, and they're a fiefdom unit, so got to watch out for that. And they're quite good on archers, but again note that only 2 of those archers are available everywhere. Gondor's army is very much defined by the fiefdom units, because the fiefdom units are very restricted, as I've already discussed, and outside of those fief units you actually have very few options altogether. Now do know that Gondor's roster is so big I've had to include an ally just to show you, so the units that I've segregated off onto the allies side that will actually be talked about properly when discussing their roster are the Ministereth Guardians, which we'll get to when we discuss elites, because we can look at them because we're allied to them, and also there's our Bodyguard, which is standing just there. We'll look at our Bodyguard for them as well. Otherwise I've included units that you can get through the Ruthian Barracks just to show you what you can get. So there's only 2 units missing from this mainstream roster, but we're going to start with Gondor Militia. Now do note, owing to a bug, Gondor Militia now look like this from game start. No longer do they have the brown design from Taro M's mod that they used to have. We could not figure out why, but that model was randomly crashing the game on certain battle maps for absolutely no reason. So at the moment, they've been dropped down to their standard design, and they're no longer sort of blue. Gondor has a very much black and white theme, apart from fief units. But anyway, Gondor Militia, your starting unit. They cost 615, which is okay for an early tier unit. Their attack is 6, which is not bad at all, and their defense is 10, so they're a really good starting unit, particularly when you consider that your enemies will be people like Cand, who have awful early tier trash units, Ennard Wythe have awful early tier, Mordor of course has garbage units for a very long time, so your units will outclass everyone around you apart from Harad and the Ardenayim, who both match you in terms of raw damage and just general durability. Your morale is average, your morale response is average, so you'll be fighting relatively well. They won't be too much running away. The Gondor Militia are a sword and shield unit, so they can perform attacking or defensive roles. They are supported by Territorial Guardsmen, who are a unit I absolutely love, I have to say. And they are a defensive spear and shield unit. So similar theme, high-ish defense of 12. Their attack's a little lower because spearmen always have a little lower attack. And that's only 3. Their charge is also not that great, so they're a really defensive unit. They won't do very well at killing the enemy, but they will survive for quite a while. Most Gondor units, or in fact nearly all of them, like fighting in the grassland. They don't care either way about forests, and they don't like the winter, and they don't like barren. Do note that I've said this many times before, but Gondor has been likened by Tolkien to a Mediterranean climate. So winter and snow is something that they ideally are not going to be all that suited with, and they prefer hotter temperatures. The other unit that you will get that's mainstream, or on 2 minds. No, we'll stick with melee before we jump over to the archers. So the only 2 units in your first tier that you can get everywhere are Territorial Guardsmen and Gondor Militia. But supporting them are 3 fiefdom units here: Laminin Clansmen, Anfalas Pikemen, and Laminin Marines. The Laminin Marines are arguably the best. So the general principle behind fiefdom units is that we take a baseline unit, so in this case the Territorial Guardsmen, and we just make it slightly better, but then we restrict that unit a lot. So you'll still have likely more Territorial Guardsmen than you ever would Laminin Marines, even though the Marines are just a straight up upgrade to Territorial Guardsmen. So the Guardsman is an attack 3, charge 2, defense 12. Laminin is an attack 5, charge 3, defense 14. So as you can see, just better across the board. Plus, they throw javelins. And as already mentioned, they're your only javelin unit. So you will probably have them in all of your armies, even in the late game. They require what's known as a Southern Anduin region. And essentially that is any region either on the east, north, south or west bank of the Anduin, depending on which arm of the Anduin you're on, from Ministereth down. So any region that just borders the Anduin, either on the northern or the southern bank, from Ministereth right to the end. So they're available in about 7 regions, I think. So they are actually one of the more numerous fiefdom units. They get 55 meters on their range, 3 missiles to throw per man. So if half the battalion dies before they throw their javelins, then the remaining half will have 6 javelins each. That's how it works. And they get a bonus against mounts, because all javelin units do. But also note they're spearmen when they finish with their javelins. A direct upgrade of the Territorial Guardsmen for about an extra, well, it's an extra 220 in cost. And it's probably about an extra, I would have thought, 100 maybe in upkeep. So they do cost more for it. Now, the Anfalas Pikemen are not an upgraded version of anything. They are your only pikemen for a very, very long time. Gondor's chief weakness, if we are to discuss it now, is anti-cavalry, which is why Harad and Cand can present such a threat. You don't have cavalry of your own really to chase down the enemy, and your only anti-cavalry option that's really going to hit home well are the Anfalas Pikemen. Now, do note, of course, you've got Territorial Guardsmen and you've got Laminin Marines, who are both spear units, but in terms of real elite killing machines, Anfalas Pikemen and Fountain Guard are your only options. So your biggest weakness really is anti-cav. But the pikemen are just early tier pikemen. They're much better than farmhand pikemen, which are also available to you. Their attack is 3, so with the pike animation you've got an attack of about 9, but their defense is always offset for that, so their defense of only 8. They come from very far away, which is also the problem. They require Anfalas or Andrast, which are the 2 regions right on the edge of the map, which is from Tharagrondost across to Lond Gallen, the Green Haven. That is where they are available from. So very, very rare unit, and it will be a long time before they even walk to your front line, so you've got to watch out for that. They're relatively cheap, though, for how useful they are. They're a fantastic unit. In the early game, you really want them in your army. But do note that they train very far away. And finally, Laminin Clansmen, who are ambushing sort of strike infantry. They're effective against armor, the first unit in your early tier that is, indeed your first unit that is. Excellent stamina, and they can hide anywhere, so they're ambush strike infantry. They have an axe and a shield, so not really brutal strike infantry. Their attack is only 6, whereas normally two-handed axe strike infantry has more of an 8, a 9, or a 10 attack. They come from Ethring, Tarnost, or Kalembel, which may need to be reworded because I'm sure Ethring no longer exists. So we'll get around to that and reword those. Their morale is good. The morale response is impetuous. And note they're really quite fast. They are 10% faster than all other ground infantry units. So very good indeed. They are just excellent strike infantry. They'll flank well. You can hide them out in the front of your line. The enemy won't find them, and then they'll charge right into the enemy very quickly. They're also very good at chasing down archers because they're faster than archers. But do know they cost 725, so a little more expensive. And they come from roughly the centre of Gondor, is the provinces that you'll likely get them from. So as I've already mentioned, you get some archers, and there are 2 available. The first are, of course, Archer Militia. And again, this unit is available everywhere. You can train it in all of your provinces. Its melee attack is very poor, its charge is very poor. Its defense, though, is 8, which is quite good for an early tier archer. And its missile is 3, which is also good for an early tier archer. You're not a really properly dedicated archer faction, and most of your archer units are quite restricted. But you will still outclass Mordor, certainly in the early game. The Ardenaim and Harad will eventually get the better of you in terms of archers, but in the early game you'll hold your own well. Average morale, average round response, 150 meters. Unfortunately, you've got a low accuracy and only 18 arrows, though, so you won't get too many kills with Archer Militia, which is why you should try and supplement them with the Lord of the Rings Conquest Blackroot Vale Archers. I really like this model, and I'm really pleased that we swapped the old model for this one. I think it's good, but do note that when they upgrade, they do upgrade to the other model, the older model. So both of them are now in the game. But when they start the game, this is what Blackroot Vale Archers now look like, with the sword on their back, which I've always liked. They are a direct upgrade again of Archer Militia. So where before it was 3 melee and 3 missile, it's now 6 melee and 4 missile. And the defense has gone up by 1 as well. So they're just a better version of Archer Militia. Do note, however, though, that Archer... oh, no, sorry, neither of them get a shield. I was thinking the Archer Militia draw a shield, but no, they don't. So both of them have no shield at all, so arrow fire will always be a trouble for them. But the Blackroot Vale Archers, the cost, unfortunately, I can't show you because they're mercenaries, but I think it's about 700, something like that. So they're only slightly more expensive for a much better unit. There's no reason not to get them. They come from Ethring, Kalembel, and Serolond. I think Ethring is still in the game. I should have had a look on the other map. But anyway, they come from central Gondor again, and you get 3 of them at game start. Now, do note as well, they're 5% faster than other ground infantry. Their accuracy is average, their range is 180, and their missiles are 24. So they are in every conceivable way better than Archer Militia, except you just don't get as many of them. That is the key distinction once again. If you could, you want an army of Blackroot Vale Archers before the Barracks Event, but you won't be able to train enough, so Archer Militia will fill their gaps. You also get Cavalry Militia at this tier as well, Gondor Cavalry Militia. Now they are only good at chasing down running units or trying to rout archers or rout units that are already in combat. They're not very good at dedicated attacking. Their charge is low of only 5, their attack is poor of 4, their secondary attack is only 3, their defense is 10. They're really not very good. But cavalry is absolutely crucial to success, and they will chase down routing units, which is their primary goal, and they will break Mordor's lines very easily if you charge into the rear of the enemy. But if you charge into the front of really any enemy, they will do very poorly. They're awful cavalry, so there are very few uses indeed. Right, the Barracks Event is roughly speaking along this line here, and this is where you start to get a few more dedicated units. Now, the UI shows you what they look like when they are fully upgraded, but that's not the same for every unit. But if we start with Gondor Infantry, this is what they look like when they are unupgraded, and then they have 3 tiers of their upgrade pattern, and it ends with them in full plate that we all like from the movies, apart from diehard fans who will bite your head off non-stop about the fact there shouldn't be any plate armor. They have good morale response, 8 attack, 19 total defense. They are a straight up upgrade of Gondor Militia and available everywhere. They will form the backbone of the Gondorian army, hence why it's written on their card. They're quite expensive though for not fantastic stats. You tend to get elite units around 1,000. But I say not fantastic stats. This is your mainline unit with a defense of 19. The average mainline unit's defense is around 14 or 13, so a really, really good defensive unit. Now they're a sword and shield, so they can be aggressive or defensive. It's better to be aggressive with them though, because you've also got the Spearmen, who have a higher defense but a worse attack. Available everywhere again, same cost. They are the defensive version, and the infantry are a slightly more aggressive, offensive version. So good units all round, and they look really good when you upgrade them. Now they're also supported by another fiefdom unit, which is not a better version of anything. They are a standalone, fantastic strike infantry. So you could say they're a better version of Laminin Clansmen, but they each have a different role, because the Laminin can hide everywhere. So they're more about morale damage. These are more about raw damage. They frighten enemy infantry, and they're effective against armor with a high attack of 8 and a charge of 6. So a much better in terms of damage than the Laminin. Their defense is also 17 versus 12, so they will survive for a very long time in combat. They also happen to look absolutely fantastic, and when you upgrade them to get plate armor as well, they are my favourite visual unit bar none. I love this unit. They're really, really useful. Now they come from Lossarnac, which is there's only one Lossarnac region, or possibly actually Brethil. The castle of Brethil away to the west of Calasast may also give you these units. But at most they come from 2 regions, but I think it's only 1. So they're very rare. But that region is very near to Mordor, so you will see a lot of these, apart from they come after the Barracks event. They cost 1,085 as well, so no cheap unit. They are not a cheap unit. Oh dear. In terms of archers then, Gondor Archers are available everywhere, and these are the last archer unit that's available everywhere. So your actual main archer units are Militia and Gondor Archers. And you'll note their missile attack is only 5, so really not fantastic archers. But their defense is 15 and their melee is 5. If you compare that with Gondor Infantry, his defense is 19 and melee is 8. They are only slightly worse than them, and they're much better than Gondor Militia in melee. So once they've finished with their arrows, they will still hold up well, but nowhere near as well as proper elite units would. But they're not a proper elite, so we can't compare them that way. But their range is 170, accuracy is average, and missiles are 24. You will note that the Blackroot Vale range is 180. So arguably the Blackroot Vale are a better archer unit than Gondor Archers, purely because they have a slightly better range. It depends how much you think range matters. They both have the same accuracy and the same number of missiles. So those are the Gondor Archers. Ithilien Rangers, however, will be the bulk of your archer army for a long time. They can hide anywhere, and they are ranger units, which are always very good human archers. They have exceptional accuracy, meaning they are fantastic slayers of anything they shoot. 220 meter range, which is brilliant, and 36 missiles. They're also 5% faster in terms of running speed than most other units, so they can get away a bit easier. Their melee is 7 and their defense is 13, so in terms of melee stats, they are closer to the Gondor Militia than the Blackroot Vale or the Gondor Archers. But in terms of missile, there is none finer, apart from the direct upgrade of themselves in a moment. But a 6 missile attack is very good. But what makes them fantastic, really, is the exceptional accuracy and the long range. They'll be killing a lot of things before they get anywhere near you. Silent killers, I like to say, archers are. They'll be killing things without you even realising they are. Ithilien Rangers, as it mentions there, come from Ithilien, which is any region on the eastern bank of the Anduin, from about level with Caer Andros all the way down to the Poros River, which marks the northern border of Horondor, which starts as Candish territory at the start of the game. So they come from, I think, 3 regions. It may be 4, but it's 3 or 4, and they're all on the eastern bank. So you've got to get up into Mordor's grill in order to train your Ithilien Rangers. And then we come to your dedicated cavalry. Now, this is the last of your cavalry as well, unless you can count what Dol Amroth gives you. And they do look very nice, but they're just not all that great. We'll start with the Gondor Cavalry. These are available everywhere, and they're obviously the mounted version of Gondor Infantry. 16 total defense, 5 charge, 7 attack, good morale response. They have a standard running speed, but do note they do get a bonus against other cavalry. So they are one of the 3 units that are really truly dedicated against cavalry. So Gondor Cavalry's main role is killing other cavalry. They don't have a particularly good charge. They don't have a spear or a lance, which also makes them worse in charging. They are cavalry killers. They cost 1,000, and they look quite good as well, particularly with the caparison that they get here, which I think is nice. A better version of them, though, are the Pinnith Gellan Cavalry. And remember, one of your general's bodyguard starts with these, and you will use him all the time. and your campaign will then be a doddle. Now, they only come from Seralond, only one region. Their attack is 7 with a lance. Their charge is 9. So the same attack as Gondor Cavalry, but they have a lance, but their charge is 9, which is fantastic. Their total defense is slightly worse than the Gondor Cavalry, though, so they won't survive in combat as long. This unit is designed to charge into the enemy, kill many of them, and make them break. The Gondor Cavalry unit is designed to chase down other cavalry. Those are the roles of these two units. Do note that Gellan Cavalry have a secondary attack of 6, which is slightly lower, so they are worse overall in terms of dedicated melee, but they are fantastic on the charge and will break lots of units, and they will carve through Mordor's 250-man strong battalions like they are nothing. Really good unit, but they only come from one location. But do note you do get the Fiefdom Barracks in Ministereth, so technically 2 locations. So they're rare, but they are fantastic. And you don't get anything better apart from the absolutely odd and sporadic training of Seaward Lancers, Ruthian Squires, and Knights of the Silver Swan from Dol Amroth. But then we jump up to your elite tier there. Now, the only elite unit that you get everywhere are the Citadel Guard. And they are an elite spear unit. Total defense of 29, 9 attack, 4 charge. They are very good morale response, bonus against mounts. They're just good spearmen. Now, if you're wondering why Denethor no longer has these, whereas he did before, it's because you won't get these as a free upkeep unit until very late in the game, and Denethor is very much intended to stay in Minas Tirith for much of the game, so we gave him a normal general's bodyguard so he would have free upkeep, because their upkeep is about 500, which is a lot of money in the early stages. So we didn't want that. And we didn't want to give him a unique bodyguard. He's not worth one. He's not worthy of a unique bodyguard. So he's got the generals and no longer Citadel. But they're just really good spearmen. 9 attack, 29 defense. They cost a lot though, so watch out for that. But they're available everywhere. Units that aren't available everywhere are all of the others. So we'll start with the Fountain Guard. These come from Minas Tirith. You can train them from the start of the game, but you only get 2 units before the Barracks event. They inspire your troops, but they are just fantastic pike units. Note that they will not run away. They have locked morale. They are the best of the best for Gondor. They cost 1,400, their defense is 22, and their attack is 7. So if you go with the general pike pattern, that's an attack of 21. They are fantastic pike units, and they will play a very pivotal role in ensuring the crossings of Osgiliath and Caer Andros are maintained by the Gondorian garrisons. Try and get those units into the battle as soon as you can. Their sword equivalent are the Wardens of the White Tower, who no longer have blue capes, which is good. They now have black ones. The Wardens of the White Tower are fantastic sword and shield infantry, and in version 4.5 are actually available in now, I think, 3 regions rather than 1. So that needs to be updated. But their attack is 11, their defense again is 29, so the same defense as the pikes. No, who had 29? I've already seen someone who had 29. Citadel Guard. The same defense as Citadel Guard, slightly different in terms of its actual makeup. They have 1 worse defense skill, but 1 more armor. Their attack is 11, which is brilliant for a sword and shield unit. Really, really good. They also have locked morale, but nothing else that really makes them stand out. They're just really elite units. They will carve through anything in the early game with ease. And do note that Boromir starts with these as his bodyguard, and so he will be pivotal in your campaigns. And lastly, the Guards of Osgiliath, which come from the rebuilt Osgiliath, or actually just having a barracks in Osgiliath. You no longer have to rebuild Osgiliath to train this unit. They are a halberdier, so effective against enemy armor, and they inspire your troops. They're just a halberd version of the pikemen, the Fountain Guard, except they have worse morale, because these aren't the best of the best. They're an iconic unit, but they're not a dedicated, really well-drilled unit. They've been hastily put together to mark Gondor's reclamation of Osgiliath, but they're nothing like the Fountain Guard, which is almost like a warrior cult, really, isn't it, in how they don't move and do all this kind of stuff. But the Guards of Osgiliath are just really good Gondorian warriors with halberds and nice armour. The total defense is 23, their attack is 8, their charge is 6. Now the halberd animation is a bit better than anything else, but nothing substantial. It's nowhere near as good as a pike. But note that they're effective against armour, so a really good late game elite killer, or killer of elites is probably a better way to describe that, otherwise it's a bit confusing. And lastly, the final thing that also comes from Osgiliath, and as I say is very rare, but is your finest archer, and those are Osgiliath veterans. So the missile attack is the same as the Ithilien Rangers, And their range is worse, their accuracy is worse, their missiles are worse, but their melee attack is 9 and their defense is 20. So the Ithilien Rangers stand out as your absolute best dedicated archer. But when you're looking at the unit as a whole, in terms of how long will it survive, what happens if someone catches it in melee, then the Osgiliath veterans are your best overall archer. But they won't kill as many things at range as the Ithilien Rangers will. But it depends on what you need from them. These are a much better mainline battle archer, basically. But they cost 1,050, so and I think the Ithiliens cost about 900, so it's slightly more expensive. But otherwise, they're just a fantastic unit. If you take, for example, the Gondor Infantry, which has a 19 defense and an 8 attack, they're a slightly better version of Gondor Infantry with Ithilien Ranger ranged stats. So a really good hybrid unit. Really, really good. Do not be afraid of using them in combat. They will do well. They are also your only unit that can place stakes, but note they only come from Osgiliath or Ministereth, so they are quite rare. But they look cool, and they also upgrade to have plate armor as well when they've finished. But I think the thing that looks coolest about them is they literally look like veterans. Some of them have patches over their eyes. They often have battered and bruised partial armor. Many of them start with blood all over them already. I just really, really like them. Oh dear. And then lastly, the only other Uber you get are the Ministereth Guardians. Now these used to be spearmen as well, but we changed them quite rightly because they were just Citadel Guard. There was almost no difference between them, and Citadel Guard are already so good that a couple of extra points in attack and defense when you have this higher stats means nothing. It makes no difference. So we retooled them to be a late game elite strike infantry, and that is what they are. So they don't have an effective against armor, but their attack is 16, which is phenomenal. Their defense is 24 as well, which is brilliant, and a charge of 8. They are so, so good. Compared with Lasarnak, for example, they have double the attack. They just, unfortunately, don't have armor piercing. Now, they only, of course, come from Minas Ithil, so you only get them in one location, and you've got to capture it from Mordor first before you can even get it. And then I think they come from the Barracks. They're a really late game unit. But do note they also have locked morale. So they won't run away unless you tell them to. So if you can't tell them to run away, they'll fight to the death and you'll lose them. And lastly, before we just talk about the extra few, you get the General's Bodyguard, which for Gondor is now a spear unit with a fantastic looking shield, a 10 attack, a 32 total defense, which makes it the highest in terms of defensive stats of any of your units. Or it has the highest defensive stat of any of your units. Its attack is 10, compared with the Gondor Spearmen, for example, whose attack is only 6, and the Citadel Guard, whose is 9. The General's Bodyguard is just a better version of the Citadel Guard, but there's not as many of them. They have very good morale response. They don't have locked morale, which for a general is actually good, in my opinion, because it allows you to let your general run away, which means he might survive to see another day, which is always good. But those are your General's Bodyguard. And lastly then, just to touch on the fiefdom units you get. As I say, before the Barracks Event, where have I put the Ruthian Squires? Over here. You get Ruthian Squires. And Ruthian Squires are a much better version of Gondor Militia, but they're not as good as Gellan Cavalry. They're of a like tier of Gellan Cavalry, but they're just slightly worse. But they're much better than Gondor Militia. Gondor Militia Cavalry, as I should call it. They're considerably better. Almost twice as good, in fact, in many cases. Nowhere near twice as good, but much better. So you should try and train them as soon and as often as you can. After the Barracks Event, the Ruthian Barracks then also gives you Seaward Spearmen, which is a nice go-between your own Gondor Spearmen and Citadel Guard. Although in truth, actually, the Seaward Spearmen are just identical to your Gondor Spearmen, but you can get them anyway. You may not actually be able to, that might be a leftover. You also get Talon Knights, so a fantastic elite, which allows you to get, of course, the Wardens of the White Tower and Dol Amroth's version, the Talon Knights. So you get a few more elite units, because they will only come from the Ruthian Barracks in Tarnost, or if you capture it, Dol Amroth. You also get Seaward Lancers, which are a fantastic late-game cavalry unit as well, thus supplementing your cavalry options. They're considerably better than Gellan Cavalry, so a really good unit. And you also get Knights of the Silver Swan. The game's just such a good cavalry unit. Very expensive though, nearly 2,000 gold coins. But so good. Such an elite unit. And for you, they only come, as I say, from Dol Amroth or from Tarnos, but a really, really good unit, nevertheless. Do note as well, if you make it all the way to Tharbad, you get the Tharbad Royal Guard Pikes. If you make it all the way to a Numinas, which you probably won't, but if you do, you get the Sons of Numenor, who are actually a Reunited Kingdom unit that is just waiting for the Reunited Kingdom to exist before they can come into the game. But at the moment, they're available for you in a Numinas if you make it all the way there. You can train Horondor mercenaries in Horondor as well. Now, they are just a dedicated mercenary unit, but they're a slightly worse version of Lossarnak Axemen. Only slightly, though, as you can see. Their attack is 7 compared to 8, and their defense is 15 compared to 17. So only very slightly behind. They come from the 5 or 6 regions of Horondor, which you can see on a map. It's the northern part of Harad. So a good little unit there as well. And lastly, I also popped in the Farmhand Pikemen. You're a nation that get Farmhand Pikemen. Farmhand Pikemen are an absolute garbage trash tier pike unit. But even a garbage trash tier pike unit is still fantastic against early tier cavalry. So they're very, very, very useful unit. And a lot of nations do get them. They come from the growth generating building. You'll note their defense is only 6. They die to arrow fire. Almost every arrow kills them. Basically, apart from orcish trash arrows, almost everyone else kills them by arrow fire. Their attack is only 2, but of course they've got a pike, so that's still about 6-ish. But they're awful against anything that isn't cavalry. But against cavalry, they really cannot be underestimated. They will do so well against cavalry for their relatively to their cost and stats. Ah, dear, take a deep, long breath, because that is it. Gondor is concluded. We can hand everything over to the AI and watch them absolutely trounce, or probably not, but hopefully watch them trounce the enemy that we are up against here today. But that is Gondor. So Gondor's military is very much an infantry-focused military, and it is heavily supplemented and categorized by its restrictive fiefdom system. Its units are rare, its better units are quite rare, but it is supported by a main line of units that are actually really dependable. So Gondor is quite a fun one to play militarily. Particularly, it's just nice seeing all the different sort of alliances on the field, really, isn't it? But anyway, who do you think we are up against next time? There's a lot of cavalry over there. It looks like a lot of ranged cavalry. There's a fair amount of infantry down the middle. It looks to be a bit of a bluey sort of hue, but there's the odd red in there. Is that some gold I see across the centre? Some fast-moving cavalry there as well, with nice golden plate. Many people are probably now coming around to knowing and guessing who this is, particularly now that we've seen that unit in action. And there's your siege, and it is, of course, the High Elves. There's Gil-galad's company. There's some of their Dunedain that they get to train. Lindar Guards running through there. More Dunedain, because the AI chooses one of everything. It really fills out its roster. There's some Eldarinwe Tierno, a Manyar Swordmasters, Sindar Axemen, more Tierno, and then there's more of their fast-moving cavalry, a Manyar Riders, galloping away on that western edge. Oh, but someone has stoked the wrath of the Knights of the Silver Swan, and they are preparing to take down whatever it is that stands in our way. Let's charge with them for a moment, because they're such a good-looking unit. Particularly the helmet. The quality and detail in that helmet is unbelievable. If you get a chance, get in close and look at a Knight of the Silver Swan. Oh, no, they've decided they're going to run away. And the Emanyar Riders have caught up with them, and the charge is absolutely weak and pathetic. And the two units draw their swords and go in for it. Such a shame. Such an anticlimactic charge there. Royal Tharbad Guard showing these Emanyar Rangers why they shouldn't charge head-on into a pike unit, giving a nice clear definition. And look, they've sent Seaward Spearmen in to trounce them from the side, flanking perfectly. Or are they? They're not charging. Yes, at the last minute they decided they'd charge. But the bulk of the armies, of course, are meeting over here, where the elves are rushing into our Osgiliath veterans who've been caught trying to run away. Lindar Guards ready to face up against the Fountain Guard. Citadel Guard have gone into Shield Wall, of all things. I didn't know the AI could do Shield Wall. There's the Guards of Osgiliath holding their halberd position. And there's Eldarinwe Roquen, the finest cavalry unit in the game in terms of raw stats. The Roquen, absolutely fantastic unit. Many people keep moaning in the comments section. I say moaning because I'm a cynical bastard. But they keep moaning that the High Elves have lost their traditional golden looking armor, and it always just makes me bang my head against the wall, because there it is on display for you all. It's just not as common as it was before, and it is now used on the elite units only. Laminin Marines firing away with their javelins, and that is it. So thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. I do hope you've enjoyed this overview, and stay tuned because hopefully in the next week or so we will get version 4.5 out, and then all the bug fixes will be in one nice place. You'll all have to re-download it, which ensures that the bug fixes will apply, so we'll get less reports of people reporting bugs we've already fixed. Otherwise, there's no key substantial gameplay changes to 4.5 at all. It is purely a bug-fixing patch, but there were a fair few little oddities. Nothing that was going to really crash your game or end your campaigns, but just the odd sort of a nuisance and annoyance. So we've refixed it, and 4.5 will be on its way soon. But until we speak again, Nevair na den perimad Melonin, and farewell.